Hello and welcome to the Hell Project. It's been a long time since I've done anything for the Hell Project. I've been spending a lot of my time doing Critical Witness, which is another podcast. Feel free to subscribe, youtube.com/Critical Witness. I do that with a friend covering all sorts of different topics. And Hell Project's sort of subdued at the moment. But don't worry, we're going to be spending a bit of time carrying on our Matthew series. I haven't got too much planned for this channel, but feel free to comment on what's already on the channel. If you disagree, I do want to hear your disagreement. That's part of the reason why I'm not putting too much content out there, because there's not really that much new that needs to be argued against. You might disagree. Feel free to comment. I'm here with Darren Clark from Rethinking Hell, and we're now at part 7 of the Gospel of Matthew. This was going to be a small 4-part series, I think, or maybe a 7-part series or something, but we're only at chapters 11 and 12, so we've got a little ways to go, but we're digging in and really enjoyed it. Good to see you again, Darren.
Good to see you, Phil.
And we're using StreamYard, which is a little bit better tech than my fumbling around with OBS, and everything seems to work, and it's just a lot more slick. So hopefully everything will continue as smoothly as it already has for the rest of the show. So we're going to go into Matthew chapter 11 and 12. I'll give a little bit of a summary of where we're at. And so the main thing to know is that in Matthew, we need to know that it's all about the forgiveness of sins, the coming of God's kingdom in Jesus, and Jesus being the anointed one or the Messiah. That's pretty much the theme going throughout. But from a hell perspective, so far we've dug really deep into the word based on the Greek word apollumi. Darren, feel free to correct my pronunciation.
Oh, no, not me. No.
We can spot the Greek word, but maybe not pronounce them. Either way, is a word that means destroy, totally destroy, and we see images of this destruction around the killing of children in Matthew 2, which is where Herod kills children, and he seeks to apollumize Jesus. Very much in the context it's to kill. And so we also see this word used throughout with burst wineskins and various things like that mean a destruction that, if we apply that to humans, would mean that they are killed, they are dead. And so when we get to Matthew 10 and we see this word destroy, well, it makes sense to read that in the sense that when God destroys body and soul in Gehenna, it means that both the body and the soul are destroyed, in the sense that the wineskins are destroyed, in the sense that the children are killed. And that would be a good, consistent reading from the beginning of Matthew. So that's kind of where we're at. And the various images of fire and destruction we've seen so far, again, in Matthew 3, we've got the clearing out of the barn, and the threshing floor is cleared and the chaff is burnt up. There's not really any room for eternal conscious torment in that image when you take the language at its meaning. And in the whole picture, that you have to start reading into that. And we've engaged with the arguments for eternal conscious torment in these verses. So please do feel free to dig into the multi-hour, multi-part series that has been the Gospel of Matthew. There's loads of different bits of information, and we'll probably do a summary when we get to Matthew, the end of Matthew 28. We've got a little ways to go. When we get there, we'll probably do a final conclusion of the Gospel of Matthew, where we summarize these ideas and in a little less time. So that's pretty much a summary, is that we've really got through to Matthew 11, and there's nothing there.
Well, there's today with these two chapters, it's just about noting just points where you might see a theme being developed. There's nothing major in the sense of major proof text for hell, but with Matthew, we want to note these themes, how he's unpacking it throughout his whole gospel, because that helps us understand when you get, what he means when he gets to those big texts. So that's what today's about. You'll see, and certain texts might just be used to support the idea of something like gradated punishment or degrees of punishment. So we can talk about that again, which we've already visited, but we can revisit it again.
Before we get into Matthew 11 and 12, or is it just Matthew 12? Did we do Matthew 11?
No, 11 and 12.
It is 11.
It's 2 chapters.
I've scrolled down into too far into the text. That's why I'm jumping ahead. Matthew, so before we get there, there's been a couple of times that we've been a little bit surprised by how much is actually in Matthew that pertains to conditional mortality. And what's been your biggest surprise so far?
Matthew 5:5, and it's quotation from Psalms 37, which is patently about inheriting the land, living forever on it, as opposed to the unrighteous who are like smoke, or utterly destroyed. The language there is like they're not there anymore now, which you would say, Psalms is about the earthly, for what happens on the earth or something like that. But Jesus is pulling that through, and I am seeing signs within Matthew where he's developing that theme. Actually, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to get to that. So, and this is one of these nuggets. I had no idea Matthew was talking like this, but we'll get to it. So nice. That's probably the biggest discovery I've made through this series, and it makes a lot of difference for how we argue from Matthew. It's no longer just a document of annihilation where you got fire destroying, but he's also you've got this clear theme where he's talking about living forever, from Matthew 5 onwards, and how he unpacks that. So when you get to 25:46, eternal life doesn't just mean some qualitative thing. It really does mean living in the land forever.
And the eternal punishment of being not living in the land forever.
So capital punishment becomes not just that it's a penalty of death, which it is, but that death deprives you of that life, which is what Psalms 37 is kind of talking about, isn't it? If you fade away, you're utterly destroyed. You're not living forever on that land. You haven't inherited it. You're not enjoying that.
Absolutely. I know that's definitely been my thing that I've enjoyed so far. And as we dig into this, and we'll repeat some themes from previous chapters, so that's going to come into play throughout. But the biggest thing for me is the finding the entire context. And how often do we hear in these conversations single verses, or maybe 2 verses at best, and it's there? Look, it's the plain reading for this view. And you're like, but this is the whole book of Matthew. There's nothing that can get me there from the context, and that's what I think has been eye-opening for me in changing the way I debate a little bit with this. Is if someone pulls out Matthew 25, 4.
25:46.
41. Sorry, I was just when they pull that out as the sort of proof text of look, this is it. I can now go, well, let's first look at Matthew 2, Matthew 3, Matthew 13, Matthew 10. He's used these images all the way through. Okay, now let's look at Matthew 25. Now you've got to tell me why that suddenly changes the meaning from all this. And that for me is a better way of understanding the Bible, and it's a lot more freeing rather than trying to go, here's a single verse and therefore. I know you don't do that with any other book, but for some reason with the Bible, that seems to be how people use it. Anyway, let's get into we've got a little bit of just checking you're still there, Darren. You froze a little bit.
I am.
You are there.
I'm here.
There we go. I've not got your HD coming through at the moment, so we're going to have to work on that.
All right.
Cool. So
let's go on to, as long as the sound is okay, then I
can hear you now.
If you're getting head shots, that's all right.
It's all good. Hopefully it'll sort itself out in a minute while I'm reading from Matthew 11. So Matthew 11, 1 to 24. I'll just go for it. I'll just get my screen up there. There we go. So I'll I've got the N. I'll put the ESV because I prefer the ESV generally. Here we go. When Jesus had finished instructing his disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach. Sorry, just moving things around on my screen. And on there to teach and preach in their cities. Now, when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?" And Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. Blessed is the one who is not offended by me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds concerning John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Behold, those who wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is he of whom it is written, 'Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly, I say to you, among those born of women there has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist, yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. But to what shall I compare this generation? It is like the children sitting in marketplaces and calling to their playmates. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang the dirge, and you did not mourn. But John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, yet wisdom is justified by her deeds. Then he began to denounce the cities where most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And you, Capernaum, I always get these names wrong, will you be exalted to heaven? You will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you. At that time, we're there. We'll pause there. There we go.
Yeah. So that last bit there, where we're talking about, but I tell you, it'll be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And then in 24, but I tell you that it would be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you. That's familiar, isn't it? Why is that familiar?
Oh, well, it's consistently used as, look, there's degrees of punishment. It's just generally, and degrees therefore means eternal conscious torment.
Right. So when
you can't have the same, if all the punishment is the same, meaning that death is the same punishment for everyone, it can't be more or less tolerable. That's the general argument against conditional immortality, as I've engaged with it.
And it's also a positive argument. And what I mean by positive is that they use it as an argument to support ECT, that even though the punishment is the same for everyone in how long it is, forever, there's a different intensity of the punishment. These kind of verses are literally used to support that notion that there's a different intensity of torment, or a different experience of that. So it's like Hitler gets a lot more burning, a lot more pain, a lot more torment. So this kind of verse is literally used to support that notion. So I want us to keep that in mind, because when you measure that up with what it actually says, then I would ask, does it suit conditionalism better than it suits eternal conscious torment? Yeah? Okay. I'm on my notes here, so I can't see if my head's floating off the screen.
Oh, no, you're good. You're all good.
Yep. So where are we? I'm just catching up. Just before. No, it won't. That's a bit of a red herring. I was going to say something else. But there's a few problems with this argument when it is applied to ECT. All right. It specifically mentions that it will happen on the day of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem to allow the idea that he's talking about something that would happen in eternity, but just on that day of judgment. Would you agree with that, Philip? Or is there a way that they can get around that, or they can explain that, or talk to it?
It's yeah. I mean, from what I can't see anything other than in that day. And I've not come across anyone who's really focused in that day, and that's something that I picked up from, I think, your Rethinking Hell conversation with William Tanksley and Chris Date, focusing on in that day for 2 Thessalonians 1:9, and that's
and 10
and 10, yeah.
When he comes,
yeah, when in that day is quite a strong argument that it's not going to be ongoing, conscious. But yeah, I've not come across anyone focus on in that day in this passage, at least.
Well, they never like a traditionalist never mentions it. They won't. What they want to focus on is that there's a difference for different people. So Sodom, it's more tolerable for whatever they experienced, or on that day, judgment will be more tolerable for them. Obviously, for the people who heard the gospel and refused, there's going to be some more kind of judgment. That's what they're focusing on, but they never mention this day. You can draw it to their attention, but it's like they don't really want to. But they only, I'm not really sure, because I haven't had feedback from traditionalists when I've pointed this out, so I'm not really sure what they'd say. I'd suppose they might say that they realise they've got eternal torment or something like that in store.
Yeah,
but that may be a bit of a long bow, but I'd like to unpack any arguments that are presented, but I haven't really fielded any. No, they don't really address it at all.
No.
And in debate, Chris Day hasn't had his traditionalist opponent address it when he's brought it up. It's just a silence, as far as I can tell.
Yeah,
I guess I'm looking for something. It certainly doesn't mention torment, pain or torment. So the more tolerableness, they're assuming that it must involve pain or torment. So from a conditionist point of view, we can explain why it might be more tolerable on that day from biblical texts. So, for instance, Isaiah 66:24 has this idea of shame and abhorrence. So the living righteous go out from new moon to new moon, and they're looking on the slain bodies, the slain enemies, their corpses, the enemies of God, and they're abhorring them. And so Jesus pulls that as a near verbatim quote. He refers to that, and when he's talking about Gehenna in Mark 9:48. So that idea of shame, it's not, it probably implies that those bodies are going to be destroyed by the fire and worms, but there's this very strong notion of shame that they're unburied. That was an abhorrence to the Jewish mindset. So if you're coming to God and you're saying that's what's in your mind as a Jew, because you have extra shame because you heard the gospel but you rejected it. Where Sodom and Gomorrah didn't hear that, well, then they're going to have more shame on that day when they're brought before God and it's revealed to them what they've done. And so there's going to be more of that sense of shame, and they know they're going to be abhorred for eternity or something like that. So why doesn't that account for the language of more tolerable? The mode of death is another one. Chris Day is always pointing that out. Like execution, you could put a needle in someone that's relatively, and this is one that does bring in pain. That's a painless death. It's less confronting. But if you're like, think of William Wallace in that movie where he's gutted, they pull his guts out and shows him. Yeah,
Yeah.
is that really tolerable?
Yeah.
So the way you die now, if you're more sinful and God's anger is burning more against you, would that be more or less tolerable? Why doesn't that explain the language? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, why is it automatically assumed that just because we have annihilation in view that it can't explain that language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lack of imagination. it's a lack of imagination and a clinging on to a tradition that has been passed down by.
Well, it's also a result of just always seeing these verses trotted out, without development, without the exegesis, and to put forward an argument that's not really developed. It's just thrown out there, and then therefore, here's the argument. And that's the nature of what you get with argument. So, if I guess there's traditionalists who might take their time to write chapters on this, but who has that time? Who has that desire? There's less and less of them writing now, as opposed to even 10 years ago. So it's harder to find new books on hell. They're just not interested.
And the new ones are generally self-published in fairly terrible. And universities,
and a lot of them regurge old arguments anyway. So, but it's hard to see fresh new stuff. I'm sure they're capable, but it would take time to develop that and talk this through. And we need to put those arguments out there for them to address it in the first place. Maybe give them a reason to. So I don't mind, having to keep saying this. So, but I hope that they do bring something. But I don't understand. Well, no, I know there's no reason for them to assume that only ECT can explain this language. And I think conditionalism explains it better. That fits with the context much better. Yeah.
Definitely.
I don't know what else to say.
No, I think you nailed that. Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so if you read from, you're not getting any questions there about this at all?
No.
Okay.
No, we've. I think it's just you and me at the moment. I haven't
that's
got
okay.
anyone coming through. You've got one more: fear from being judged directly in the presence of God. Were you going to say anything on that?
Oh yes, I think I did bring that up. I mean, so the manifest presence of God, and God is a consuming fire. God is wrathful. I know not every conditionalist thinks this, but we've got the idea that God has this reaction to sin, reaction to evil, and if there's more sin, he would, so if he's judging Hitler, obviously, I think anyway that there's probably a more intense reaction from God in pouring his wrath out on that person. Now, if you're standing there and Hitler is realizing this and feeling the intensity of that, I see that explaining that difference in intensity on that day. Let me think. I mean, I use examples from, let's say, Leviticus 10, where you've got the two priests that manipulate the sacrifices wrong, and boom, from God's presence comes this fire that just consumes them.
Yeah.
But if you imagine if you're in front of the on the judgment, front of God on the day of judgment, you've got the judgment scene, and he is. And you are full of sin. You're really a wicked person, and that you suddenly realize that A, he's real, and B, he's he's real. No, I didn't say A, he's real, but just say you realize he's real. You realize he's got this wrath. It's going to be poured out on you, but you've got that extra. You've really been sinful. It's going to come out on you. That to me, that idea that you've got that intensity of response from God, or his reaction towards that sin and that evil, could explain that it's less tolerable for that person. If you don't buy into that idea that God is more wrathful towards sin, then of course that's not going to make sense. That's fine. But I can throw that out there as an option for people who hold the penal substitutionary atonement and the idea that God does express wrath against sin, and that each person would have the elderly grandma who is condemned for sin but is not evil, may attract less of a reaction from God, who is reacting to that sin. So there is room for that if you believe that concept already.
Just on that point, like I've been doing a Bible study with my church on Isaiah, and we just hit Isaiah 6 this morning, and I shared with them this Bible Project video on holiness, and I think it just encapsulates a little bit of what we're talking about in this sense of holiness. So I'm just going to share it, and hopefully I won't get a copyright claim for this. But so they use the metaphor of the sun being. I'm just going to back up a little bit. Right, here we go.
A helpful way to think about God's holiness is by using the sun.
Hopefully you can hear that.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this.
Within our solar system, and it's really powerful. It's the source of all this beautiful life on our planet. And so you could say that the sun is holy. And you can actually take this metaphor even further in that the whole area around the sun is also holy.
Yeah, because the closer you get to the sun, the more intense it gets.
Yeah, exactly. So that very power and goodness that generates all this life is also dangerous. I mean, the sun, if you get too close, will annihilate you. And in the same way, there's this paradox at the heart of God's own holiness, because if you're impure, his presence is dangerous to you. And not because it's bad, but because it's so good. And so the first time we see this paradox of God's holiness, it's in the story of Moses and the burning bush.
So God tells Moses to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. And Moses covers his face in fear. And God says, hey, don't come any closer. It's intense.
It's actually that intensity of God's holiness that's explored even more in the stories about Israel's temple, which was the main place where God's holy presence was located. And at the center of the temple was this room called the Most Holy Place.
Let's give it a minute longer.
Spot of God's presence. And whether you're an Israelite living in the land around the temple or a priest working right in the temple, you're in proximity to God's holy presence, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
So that's probably just a good place to end it, because I think that just encapsulates what you're saying pretty neatly.
Sure.
Like that's it. God's holiness is so good that us as corrupt images of God need a mediator, need blood, need something to cover us, and there is only one that can do that.
So you've got in Exodus where you've got Moses up on the mountain talking to God after the Israelites are sin, and God, Moses going, what, don't start again. God is saying, I'm going to just destroy them. It doesn't mean I'm going to ruin them, so they've lost their function or their purpose or whatever. It means they're going to kill them. Start again. And the conversation is, no, I won't. It ends with, no, I won't. But that whole issue of them being in the presence of this holy God that will, in the face of sin, react to it, plays itself out in the sense that they need a way of being able to live in that presence, even though it's not a manifest presence.
Yeah.
It's still he's got some kind of presence, and so that the temple and the priesthood becomes that way. So it's a ritual cleansing, and it's as Hebrews says, like it's not a full solution. But it requires them to demonstrate that fidelity to exactly what had been prescribed, and that's where you see in Leviticus. Us being reminded that even just erring in how they mishandle the sacrifices, boom, that's what that's harking back to. And then you've got the Old Testament prophets. They actually, Ezekiel really draws on this, where the sacrifice in the temple becomes so polluted that God cannot remain in the presence where his throne is, and so he leaves. His kabod, his glory rises up and goes away. That just blew their mind. They're like, well, he's with us. Like, where's he going? What does that mean for us? So he's like, well, I can be anywhere is really the point. But, if he stayed there, the sacrifices wouldn't be able to save them. He would have completely annihilated. There would be no Jews. That's the implication of that. So, I mean, you see that filter out through the Old Testament.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that I know probably said this in every episode of this, but it's one of those things that I do now with every book that I read on hell, is how often they connect to the Old Testament. And one of the main things for me is the recognition that all this theme of God being so good that he consumes is a theme all the way through from Exodus. I mean, I got Exodus 30 something. Can't remember which though. It might be 33. Is that phrase? I won't go with you because you're stiff-necked people, and if I do, I might consume you.
Yeah. Our God is a consuming God. Hebrews 12:29.
Yeah.
There's a theme back in the Old Testament. He consumes. His wrath is described as unquenchable. That means they won't be able to stop that. It'll do what it does, and then they bring the Old Testament brings the idea of fire in it. All of that feeds into each other. It's not just Matthew doesn't just come out of nowhere.
No, yeah,
and the New Testament. But then getting back to the discussion here of on that day, if you plug that into that theme that we've just been talking about, it would be terrifying for those people who knew that they had the gospel as opposed to Sodom and Gomorrah, and then they rejected that. Yeah, would that produce more regret or more of a sense of loss?
Yeah,
that maybe Sodom and Gomorrah didn't have because they knew that they wasted that chance. Doesn't that explain that language?
Yeah.
But they know that they're facing that reaction from God against his sin. He's going to consume them, and maybe that's more intense for them. So I see there's a biblical basis for saying that if you accept what we're saying about the Old Testament, and that's carried in through to the New Testament, I think. But that's all I'm saying. Is that you can find ways of explaining it, which is just as plausible, and probably not if more plausible than say the idea that it'll be more tolerable on that day relates to ongoing, the ongoing intensity forever in hell. Yeah. Our explanations fit better with the data.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it seems more of a tortured, pun potentially intended, view to try and get eternal and consciousness into that idea of the day. So shall we carry on? I think we made the point. If you disagree, if you stumble across this part 7 of the Gospel of Matthew and disagree, then think we're heretics, well, please put it in the comments. Do give us a bit of pushback. Explain why you think this is not a good way to understand this passage, but it needs to deal with in the day, it needs to deal with the Old Testament background, it needs to deal with everything we've said in parts 1 to 6 for me to take it seriously.
Oh, well, I would always engage with pushback on whatever reason.
Absolutely.
That's fine. Yeah, and I would probably just throw a lot of context at them, but
that's it.
That's how you develop your arguments. You get counter arguments. You go, okay, right, yep, I'll deal with that, and I learn something.
Quite happy with that.
So we should move on to verses 25 to 30. Cool. If you could read them out. And here is one where I think I realised Matthew is developing a theme here from something that we've talked about in the past. So can you just read that passage?
Yeah, no worries. So we've got just realised that I might be sharing a bit too much information with my login up there. I'm just going to.
All right. Doesn't matter.
People can randomly email me there if they want. Anyway, I'll just bring attention to it. There's not enough viewers. 25. At that time, Jesus declared, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Okay. It's possible that when he says something like, and I will give you rest, when he talks about rest in 28 and 29, that he's just talking about an easier burden on this earth. And that, I had a look at a few commentators. Yep, they accept that may be in play. Where are we? And so I don't, I would consider it, maybe it's not just that, like it could include that. But when you look at Matthew 10, where Jesus had been talking about how difficult it would be when you share the gospel, your own people will hand you over to the courts and you'll be persecuted, you'd be, even put to death. I'm not sure that it fits with, this, what he's saying here has just to do with saying that is an easier life. You've got rest. It may be that that burden is easier as you go about that, but I think there's also a that and an eschatological point of view going on here. And I think Carson and the other commentators I consulted when I was looking at this, because this is new to me, so I had to look that up. Tended to agree. So this is what D.A. Carson says in his commentary on Matthew. It's impossible not to be reminded of the heavy loads the Pharisees put on men's shoulders. So that's the here and now. The rest. And then Carson notes the cognate term for rest in Hebrews 3:4. So keep that in mind. Well, I don't want to discuss that, but there's that kind of eschatological rest. But he says the rest is eschatological, and he says compare Revelation 6:11, 14, 13, but also present reality. So what I'm saying is he's just recognizing there's both and. There's this idea that the rest is for now, which is okay in a now and not yet eschatology, that future rest is going to impact us somehow now, but it's also not just for now. There's this continuation of it, it extends into eternity. You've got the context here where he's talking about the day of judgment. And so I do think that it's really hard to escape the notion that Jesus isn't, I don't think he's just talking about taking away all of our persecutions or all of our problems as if we've entered that complete day of rest, even if the burden is lighter. I think you still have that future fulfillment in the eschaton to come. Do you have any thoughts on that before I move on?
Yeah, I was just looking at, so I've got, this is what I'm looking at, Matthew RT France, sorry.
Yeah.
France is Matthew. And he's just noticing that there's potentially a connection to the legalistic demands of the Pharisees is kind of what Jesus is talking to. So the yoke of the law, connecting that to an Old Testament symbol, both of oppression, but also a commentary of Mishnah, Abboth, and Barakoth both say that the yoke of the law is one every Jew should be proud to carry. While Jesus's yoke is sort of good, kind, not just an easy one. This kind of RT France is looking at the word easy.
Right.
Being
so what's the problem with that line of thinking then? What it's saying is that it's heavy, like the Pharisees have these heavy requirements or demands or something like that.
Yeah,
well,
I think
what do Christians debate when they talk about easy believers, and they say, well, actually, there are a lot of demands in Christianity. It may be in one sense easier to bear, but I think sometimes we argue as if we're Pharisees. I don't think that's really his point here as such. Although it may factor in that since we get eternal life and there's something going on there with how marvelous it will be with God, that requirement now isn't so heavy. But I kind of think Pharisees, who were trying to be faithful to the Old Testament covenant, would have said the same thing, because you get the same theme within Deuteronomy itself. That this leads to a good relationship with God. So even though it's a burden, and you share to your children, you teach them the law, and that's burdensome, there is something good coming from that. So I don't necessarily buy that. And if we Christians want to say, yep, there's no burden in Christianity, but I think we are going to say, look, being a Christian means that you have you do have this you do have this requirement to live it out, and it's not always easy. It's a burden, and we don't create a new law, but
it's still a yoke.
I think Paul's
still you're carrying something.
Well, yeah, it's still a yoke, isn't it? And in Paul's ethic is you are saved, you live it out. So he's always fighting against people that want to go the easy way, and he's saying, no, this could be hard. Yeah, you look at his language. So I don't know whether I buy that as as a perfect explanation.
So I mean, R.T. France is saying that it's not about being an easy one, but his argument is that it means good and kind. So it makes it's not because it's easy, not because it makes lighter demands, but because it represents entering into a disciple relationship. Learn from me, that is in Jesus, with one who is gentle and lowly in heart. So I think.
Well, so did the Old Testament. That's how they viewed it. That's like if you look at the Old Testament background and you look at how the law was expressed in, say, Deuteronomy, that's how it was expressed. You're faithful to God and life is good. You go into the land of promise. Like, how is that different to what R.T. France is saying there? So, okay, all right. I think we've got to keep that in mind and not demonize the Pharisees per se, although they are actually considered an enemy here, ultimately. Yeah, because, I mean, they're the ones that set out to destroy Jesus. That's why they're the enemy. They decide he's not the Messiah. But I don't think it's necessarily we can. It's easy to do that and use them as a fall guy. But when you look at the Old Testament context, no, that's not how a Jew would have looked at it. They would have looked at it as liberating, as the way to life in the land. Psalms 37, inherit the land forever. How good is that? You know, that's Jewish. That's what the Pharisees would have seen. So they're not that different. They in the narrative, they just decided to destroy Jesus because they rejected him. That's why they're bad. As a character in the narrative. So welcome to pushback for that, but I can't see that as a great explanation.
No,
what R.T. France is saying.
So I know I don't know if I've actually seen. Maybe I misread it, but I don't think he's necessarily disagreeing with what you're suggesting. He's saying that while the Pharisees see it as the yoke is a good thing, I think that's what he's comparing. So the Jewish teachers would say the yoke is a good thing. The yoke of law leads to righteousness. That actually there's an aspect of legalism which is good for a Jew. And I've actually talked to a rabbi fairly regularly, and he would mention that sort of things. So I don't think even what R.T. France is getting at is that the yoke isn't necessarily meaning easy in that it's a light burden. That's what it's not an easy sense of comparison to the Pharisees, but it's good because it's with Jesus. Yeah,
in that sense that if Jesus fulfills the law and you don't have to do so much other than that, have faith and live that out. Yeah, it's not burdensome in the sense that you have almost infinite things you have to do. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I just think that we stop there. I think there's more what he's saying here, and the reason one of the reasons I want to resist that is because of what I'm going to say next. I looked at the article on rest in the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery, and this is what it says. Okay, so it's only a section of the article. So yes, I cherry picked the bit that suits what I'm saying, but you can go back and read the context and see that this doesn't. What else he says there doesn't change what I'm saying here. If willingness to rest is a sign of commitment to God, it is everywhere viewed as a freedom from anxiety. Moses paints a picture of the beloved of the Lord as someone who rests in safety and rests between God's shoulders. So he's citing Deuteronomy 3:12. That's the NRSV. Here is a picture of what rest ultimately involves in the Bible: a relinquishing of human self, assertion, and a trust in God. So what he's saying is that you're relinquishing your human self, but then as you do that, you've got a trust in God going on. The psalmist enjoins us to rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. And the citation there is Psalms 37:7. All right, I'm glad. Yeah, did you pick up that reference? And then it goes on. Jesus' discourse against anxiety uses a barrage of persuasive strategies, urging people to cease from anxious striving as they trust in God to supply their needs. So Matthew 6:25-34. Rest is here a form of letting go of human control. Taken a step further, rest as trust in God's providence becomes a symbol of salvation itself. Note that link between rest and salvation. Isaiah quotes God as reprimanding his people for trusting in their own resources instead of accepting God's invitation. In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. That's Isaiah 30:15. And the last bit here is Jesus offers more than emotional rest when he utters invitation. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. So why that stood out to me is because in this article they're linking the idea of rest with the idea of salvation. So what does that remind you of? As we've talked about Matthew 5:5.
My mind's jumped to Hebrews. They shall not enter my rest. But Matthew 5:5. It's entering the land with rest.
Now, do you remember that Matthew 5:5 Jesus quoted Psalms 37? Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
Yeah.
And then when you go and read Psalms 37, you see things like it's saying that they're living on the land forever. There's this, it's almost like the quintessential fulfillment of the covenant. You're in the promised land. You've inherited it. You live there forever. It's a wonderful place. But in contrast, the unrighteous are like grass or smoke that just fade away. They're utterly destroyed. They're cut off, which means they're killed.
Yeah.
They're not there. So it's and I'm only just bringing this up to note that this is a possible way that Matthew is unpacking that theme, and I'm only doing it because this article linked rest with salvation, and he linked this idea of rest, which Psalms 37 does mention rest, by the way. So that then makes that okay. We need to actually parse this out and think how is he now alluding to that part of Psalms? Yeah. If he is, and it may be likely that he is, so I'm not asserting that it is or saying it is, but I'm just saying let's look at this a bit more. Then there's 2 points where he's alluding back to Psalms 37.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at 37 and just seeing where the rest comes in.
37:7, I think.
Yeah, there you go. Be still before the Lord, wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices.
The King James version is the version that this guy put. He did switch between different versions, which is something you have to factor in. But then I just have to look underneath the language and see what's going on. So again, I'm not actually suggesting right now that this is. I've seen this, but I want to bring this forward as a possible thread.
Someone's connected the dots there, and given that we are aware of Psalm 37 being connected to Matthew 5, it's not necessarily it's not too hard to stretch that connection.
I don't always worry if the word rest is, or word isn't actually in a verse. If the concept's there, then I'm cool with that. But again, I have to investigate that in Psalms.
Well, there's definitely that kind of wait patiently, rest. You kind of see that it's there. It'd be interesting to see why. Once you start looking into the sort of the exegesis of that and really digging into the words around why King James was rest and why others aren't rest, but there's definitely the themes of that.
What I'll do now is look at my there's a massive commentary called the New Testament, use of the Old Testament, and I'll look for references on Psalms 37 where it might be doing. If it flags some verse like this, and talks about rest, then I'll start to really investigate this more seriously and try to unpack the connections. I'd look at the Greek words used here and the Septuagint in Psalms 37:7, and maybe the underlying Hebrew that it's translated from, because it's not always reflected in the Greek of the Septuagint. But yeah, I have to investigate that a bit more.
Yeah.
A lot more, actually, and I'm happy to say that. But I think when you're reading through a narrative and you've seen a theme already unpacked, and then you see something, that's what you kind of got to do, without actually making your mind. I'm not making that assertion that this is what it's saying, but I find this kind of nugget fascinating to explore, and then I go down rabbit holes for days. I've lost, and then I'll figure out whether I'm going to keep that or not as a reference. Another little tantalizing nugget, if you go back to Matthew 11:22, Jesus asked where Capernaum will be exalted in heaven or brought down to Hades. What is that about? I mean, to my mind, that I dismiss that because that's about earthly death. But what's he saying there? Exalted to heaven, and what's he saying with Hades? Is it the grave? Is it death? Is it So again, that's another one. And if that's so, if it's somehow saying, look, I don't know what he means by exalted to heaven, which is really weird, because normally it talks about kingdom of heaven. And so that may indicate something here. But what is he saying by that contrast? What does he mean? If it turns out it's like life versus death or the grave, or then does that not, in this own context, like say there's that contrast, which is similar to what we find in Psalms 37 anyway? So they're just nuggets. They're just things that something interesting to explore. But as conditionalists, I don't know why we would not look at that in the context of how we're looking at how Matthew is unpacks his own themes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that exalted to heaven idea. I wonder what. I'll have to unpick that a little bit as well.
I have no idea. I nearly didn't say anything about it because I'm not sure. But again, there's enough there to actually ask the question: what does it mean?
Yeah, is that a term of phrase?
And Hades, that's the grave. Some might say, Luke 16, it's them. It's the rich man, and maybe, but is it? There's a lot of other ways that Hades is used. It's in the Septuagint. It's Hades translates Sheol. So and that's often just about the grave. It's
Is it exalted to? Is that a juxtaposition of life and death? Exalted to the kingdom of heaven is to bring life. I don't know.
I would think so. If we had right here either the word life mentioned or something like that.
Just in terms of what Jesus brings when he brings the kingdom. I don't know, that's the sort of language that I connect when I hear heaven, kingdom of heaven. Jesus is bringing the kingdom of heaven, and that generally entails life in all its fullness. But I mean, that might be a stretch from the context, but that's kind of what's playing around in my mind.
I think I need to look at what commentators say. Is there an allusion to an Old Testament text that brings light to it, or is there a pattern somewhere, or if there's 10 different explanations and no one really knows, well then I just leave that. That's not
need to do the digging.
But if a lot of them talk about a certain theme that's developed somewhere, or there was an existing theology wrapped up in this, or even in the testamental literature, it would give you an idea of how to think it through. So
no, I don't see anything in RT France. My commentary on that matter. I haven't looked at any others at this point, but maybe there needs to be something more in depth. Should we keep moving on?
Yeah. So all that is just go, hey, let's research this, let's unpack this more and see where it takes us. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Should we go into Matthew 12?
Yeah.
See where this goes. I'll share my screen again. Got a couple of viewers. Nice to see you joining us, 1920s and Shaunti. I hope you're both well. Feel free to ask us questions as we're going along. We're just digging into Matthew 11 and 12 tonight. Here's Matthew 12. So we're going from whole chapter 1 to 30?
No. To 30, yeah. Yeah, just to 30. And there's two separate points I'll make from this, but again, they're not that major. But
no worries. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on a Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pick heads of wheat and eat them. But when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is against the law to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry, how he entered the house of God and ate the sacred bread, which was against the law for him or his companions to eat, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law that the priests in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are not guilty? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what this means, I want mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." I just realized I've switched to the New English translation too, but that's all right. We'll keep going. Then Jesus left that place and entered their synagogue. A man was there who had a withered hand, and they asked Jesus, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" so that they could accuse him. He said to them, "Would not any of you, if he had one sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath, take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and it was restored, as healthy as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted against him as to how they could assassinate him. Now when Jesus learned of this, he went away from there. Great crowds followed him, and he healed them all. But he sternly warned them not to make him known. This fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. "Here is my servant, whom I have chosen, the one I love, in whom I take great delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. He will not break a bruised reed or extinguish a smoldering wick until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope." Then they brought him to a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute. Jesus healed him so that he could speak and see. All the crowds were amazed and said, Could this one be the son of David?" But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, "He does not cast out demons except by the power of Beelzebul, the ruler of demons." And when Jesus realized what they were thinking, he said to them, "Every kingdom divided against itself is destroyed, and no town or house divided against itself will stand. So if Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand? And if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your sons cast them out? For this reason they will be your judges. But if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God has already overtaken you. How else can someone enter a strong man's house and steal his property unless he first ties up the strong man? Then he can thoroughly plunder the house. Whoever is not with me is against me. Whoever does not gather with me scatters. For this reason I tell you, people will be forgiven for every sin and blasphemy, but the blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. Whoever speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this age or in the age to come."
Okay. So that was to... No, you went a bit past 30. That's fine.
Oh, my bad.
That's okay. It's all right. There's just the first point. There's actually 3. I had 2, but I just noticed something else that's apparent to me from my study. So I'm just going to make a note here. Oh no, I did the red there. All right, now just verse 14, which your version that you read from said assassination, but this is what I'll read out in the ESV. "But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how to destroy him." Guess what word is behind that word destroy?
Well, okay, I can have a guess.
Have a guess.
We're seeing that Apolomai again, aren't we?
Yeah. So here is a usage in this context where you've got one agent, or in this case, agents are going to apolomai or destroy another person. That's the case that we make as traditionalists, is that everywhere in the Synoptic Gospels, when you see that context where one person or, one agent or a group of agents are going to destroy another person, another living being, not a wineskin, it means to destroy. Now, your translation, what did it render that? Assassinate.
Yeah.
I would have put slain. That's really the emphatic form of death. So when you come back to Matthew 10:28, it talks about men not being able, kill the body, not the soul. Then I would think of destroy when it talks about there's one who can destroy the body and soul in Gehenna. I would say slay. So that conforms with the idea that there's this what I call a fortiori logic there, where it's a lesser to the greater. But assassinate, I don't know how to make sense of that there, but it's actually just a way of rendering that. They're going to assassinate. They're going to kill him. They're going to slay him. Yeah.
They've got
I just think if you're an assassin, that implies some nefarious notions, which I guess is true of the Pharisees in that sense. I just can't see them sending out ninja assassins. That's all.
Assassin. Yeah, I guess it's an interest. What do you mean by assassinate? I guess.
Yeah.
But,
it works, but
it has got a mark next to it to say Greek destroy. So they put a mark next to it.
I think it's sufficient to say kill.
Yeah.
In that context, which is patently what they'll do. But I think when we talk about Matthew 10:20, I think slay is really what the point is. It's emphatic killing.
Yeah.
It's assassinate doesn't carry that for me. But
it's interesting it doesn't for you. I would say that's a fair enough idea. Like if you've got is it Matthew 1 or Matthew 2? Which one is the there we go, Matthew 2.
2:13, we were talking about Herod wanting to destroy Jesus. Yeah, kill.
Yeah, when Herod wants to destroy Jesus, they render it kill.
Yeah, now I think assassinate might be right there, because that's that idea that he's seeking him. Yeah, he's sending out agents. That fits a little bit there. I mean, I'm quibbling with language. It would work either way. Don't get me wrong. But as a guy who talks about translation, my nephew is doing his PhD in translation of the Koine Greek, and he's always banging on about how bad the translations are and asking me questions, which is great because it's getting me think about what's the best way to translate something. Okay, so exegesis is different to knowing Greek, to translation per se. They have different burdens on them as tasks, but that's something I think through. What's the right English word to convey the sense meant in this particular context? Now, to kill, to slay, to assassinate, and destroy all mean the same basic thing, but what's the nuance there? So that's what I'm mulling over. But the key point is that you've got one agent, or you got agents saying we're going to destroy apolumi, another person. It always in the synoptic gospels means to kill. So when it comes to Matthew 28, why doesn't it mean that there if he's using that in the same way?
Yeah. You mean Matthew 10:28?
Matthew 10:28. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Brain thinks one thing, mouth says the other.
I get that.
That's all that point was. It's just saying we've noted this before, and I'll do it again when we come to the next text.
Yeah. Cool. Keep going. Next.
Yep.
Verse 31.
Okay, so 14. So I have been studying Matthew from the point of view that it has an apocalyptic worldview. That doesn't mean that in its genre it is an apocalyptic work. It means that, that it has the perspective that at a cosmic or universal level, it accepts that you have the demonic realm, you have a devil, chief angels or chief demons, Satan, the devil that oppose the rule of God, the kingdom of heaven. But what Matthew does, you can see that apocalyptic worldview played out in the narrative. So on the here and now in human history, as he's confronted by, say, the devil in the temptation scene in Matthew 4, or as he goes about and he heals people or he exorcises demons, he has that ultimate authority over them. They have to obey him. So you see that played out in the characterization of Jesus and the demons in the narrative itself. That's apocalyptic. So when you get to 36 to 43, that is an overt cosmic view where you've got he's sending out angels, and he's pulling people in to throw them in the fire, and it's got allusions to Daniel 3, Daniel 7, or Daniel 6, and Daniel 12. But here, no, I don't think it's that. Here, what I'm saying here is you've got just an instance where Jesus is talking about who has the authority. So this the first point was, and I wanted to unpack that idea of until he brings justice to victory, whatever that means. I'm not really sure, but in this context, he goes on to talk about the Beelzebul. I can't even say that name.
Beelzebul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what he's saying there is that I am not under his authority. I am casting him out. How could I cast him out if I was under his authority? I've conquered him. I've thrown the strong man out. Therefore, I can go and conquer. I can go and throw demons out of people. Yeah, that's the question in it. Well, what spirit do you do this? This demon head figure? No, I've conquered him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been the theme in Matthew ever since I think Matthew 4:10, where the devil was defeated by Jesus and he ran with his tail between his legs. He was a defeated enemy. See?
Yeah.
That's apocalyptic. Yeah.
Okay.
And so when you see Jesus saying, throughout the gospel, you see Jesus healing people, that's often in the context of demon possession. So exercising people is healing them, and healing them is exercising demons. So when we think of salvation as bringing, healing to us, if Matthew goes on to talk about that, then for Matthew, that's what that's talking about, that victory. And that's what I mean by, and what does it mean by until he brings justice to victory? Does that mean, is he alluding here to Matthew 13:40 to 43, where all causes of evil, all lawbreakers, all gathered together in this great apocalyptic scene and thrown in the fire and destroyed? Is that where the justice will be? That's all I'm going to try and say here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds good to me. Sort of just mulling over part of that and the sort of language of apocalypse and various things.
I threw a lot at you right then.
Yeah, that's good. I'm gonna have to process of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes sense, the language of healing, and I have wondered how to sort of pass out in the past.
Go back through the narrative where you have not the teaching sections of Matthew, but in between where Jesus is going and he's ministering. What does he often do? He goes, he exercises, he takes demons out of people, puts them in pigs. But as he does that, it's often with the idea that he's healing them. The two of this in Matthew, the two of this, they're the same, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, you do see
so
that.
If you note that theme, and that's what I'm saying here, is this another point we have to note this theme being unpacked. So it might seem unclear to you that what I'm getting at, but all I'm saying is, like, note this for later.
Yeah.
When Jesus says something like bringing justice to victory, he already has the victory.
Yeah, he's on it.
All right. This is what I'm saying. He's saying here with the Pharisees, he already has victory. So he's not saying that when we can't come to 13:40 to 43 and say that's the victory. It's not. It already has been achieved.
Yeah.
It already was achieved at the end of the temptation narrative.
Yeah.
Matthew 4:10. He already had that victory, and it's played out in the narrative. So what does he mean by bring justice to the victory? The victory already has.
Yeah.
I think maybe that means.
I get what you're pointing out.
Yeah.
It is a funny phrase, to bring justice to the victory. Well, if the victory's already been had, then the justice must be complete. The justice must come later. What does justice look like?
It's a bit like that's where
my brain's just gone ding.
Yeah,
I understood that.
Well, for the Old Testament, the Jews, that was what the day of judgment was. It was that day when all wrongs would be set right. That's justice.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, so we've already talked about in this section about the day of judgment. That's when ultimate justice is brought by God. Even in Psalms, in the Old Testament, you get pictures of promises of justice being done, but it's never fulfilled in this life. They've got a future day of judgment, of justice, when God will do it. And he's already alluded to that here in chapter 11, this day of judgment. All right. So I think that there's these little hints dropped that he's heading towards Matthew 13, where he's going to talk about when that justice is achieved at that close of the age. Yeah, the victory is already here. That's not Matthew 13 isn't about Jesus having victory. It's about him bringing justice. How does he bring justice? He destroys them. He destroys all the causes of evil. That's comprehensive. See,
That's important.
Can you see how, looking at the narrative as it unfolds, how new light is shed on old verses that are used as proof text for the hell debate? You can see how we kind of can refine our thinking.
Yeah,
that's what I've been trying to get at.
Just pulling out these little details. I mean, that's sort of something I've never quite recognised about that phrase of bringing justice to victory. So that's really helpful. So I read on a little bit too far in that last bit. Shall we go on to 31 to 37? Yeah. I'll try.
All right. So 37. So actually, just go from 34 to 37 because that's really the point there. Again, it's another point where I think that will be revisited. He's hinting at here, but he's revisiting in 13.
Cool.
40 to 43.
Right, so when we get into 13, that'll be interesting. Just on the we'll skip over the most complicated bit of the unforgivable sin. You can see in the note there, if you pause, there's an interesting point to think about, but it's definitely.
You can talk about that if you want.
Well, yeah, just to say for anyone listening who's worried, I've met a few people that get tied up with fear of hell, especially eternal conscious torment, and they get caught up thinking that they've done the unforgivable by cursing the Holy Spirit or something, and it can all get confusing. But
you know what? Given what he'd said about, the Pharisees come to him, and it's like Beelzebul. He's the one who's guiding you. He's on top of you. He's your head. He's your leader. He's the one, that's what they're implying is that actually Beelzebul has authority over him. Now, if you read that as the context of what he goes on to says, all right, but therefore I tell you, every sin and blasphemy will be forgiven, but the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. Now, who led Jesus out to the temptation? The Holy Spirit, the dove. So what are they saying here? It's just the idea that you're thinking of Jesus under the wrong authority, like Beelzebul, and that Beelzebul is the Holy Spirit. I don't know of any Christian who thinks that. So I don't know of why any Christian would think that they're stumbled into the unforgivable sin.
Yeah.
So I don't see the problem here. What they're doing is if you say that if you're blaspheming against the Holy Spirit here, it's this idea that you're confusing him with Beelzebul. And therefore that has implications for really who Jesus is, whether he really brings salvation. So it just filters down to that. So, but I don't know of any Christian who thinks that. So I don't see why they should be worried about that text.
Generally, it comes from a specific way of reading the Bible, which is generally proof text. So they've only really looked at each verse without really looking at the context. And it's a pretty nasty thing to get caught up in, and it's quite hard to. It's kind of this kind of conspiracy thinking. The way you read the Bible is only by these single verses. I've then said something against the Holy Spirit at one point in my life, therefore I've blasphemed, not recognizing how to read the scripture around that verse to recognize exactly what you've just pointed out. This is a whole mindset against what Christ is doing.
Yeah.
Consistently against him, claiming that
because if he's Beelzebul, if that's who his authority is, then he's not bringing the salvation. He's not bringing the kingdom of heaven here. Therefore, there's no salvation. So if that's who you're saying it is, then you're not actually believing all that. You're not into that. Therefore, how can you be forgiven?
Absolutely,
because you're not buying into that salvation. That's all it's saying. So it's saying something like, if you deny that the Bible. Jesus brings you salvation and you turn away from him, then you're not going to be forgiven. If you're unsaved, you're not going to be forgiven. That's really what it amounts to, I think. So,
I agree.
But there's a verse there, or like about not being forgiven either in this age or the age to come, which we would use against universalist. But then there's a whole discussion of what age means. Aeon, is it just
Yeah.
a period of time, or is it just emphasizing forever and ever? But I thought I'd leave that aside, unless
Yeah.
you want to discuss it. But
Let's keep going, otherwise we'll be here all evening.
okay. So the last point here is that you brood of, where he talks about, he says this to the Pharisees, I think. You brood of vipers, how can you speak of good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good person is out of the good treasure, brings forth good, and the evil person is out of his evil treasure, brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. Now, when he talks about that evil coming out from the person, from who the person really is, would you accept it if I said that's really a source of evil? Like I'm evil and I cause evil, I talk evil. Yeah, would you accept that?
Yeah, generally actions flow from the heart. And
you could say that really that notion of we could. They're not the only source of evil in Matthew, but it seems like that's what he's saying is there's evil coming from you because there's evil within you. Is that correct?
I would take it to be a fairly good way of understanding that bit. That's how.
Is there any other way of looking at
it? From the mouth speaks from what fills the heart. The good person brings good things out of his treasury. Evil person only brings evil things out of his evil treasury. Tell you. Yeah, that generally, well, maybe not. There's something in this verse that's like, make a tree good and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad, for a tree is known by its fruit. There is an aspect of making it which I've not quite looked into. I'm not saying it doesn't seem to be that a person is labeled as good or bad necessarily, but they can become that there's a.
Well, he's calling them evil. So you are, how can you say when you are evil? For out of, but what I'm getting at here is that, and I'll make this a bit clear, and again, if it falls over, it falls over. But I have looked at this throughout Matthew where when you just look up the word evil, that very often, evil comes from not just the demonic realm, but from people within the other characters, the human characters within the narrative. When you get to Matthew 13, 41, it talks about all causes of evil, which I used to read as maybe causes that come from, that are other than from animate beings. But I think that's not what he's getting at. I think he's getting at there that these kind of people where evil comes from wherever. Now you've got the actual parable itself that Jesus is interpreting, when it's talking about the devil going around and seeding the evil seed, and those people are evil. So he's causing evil because he's sowing it, and obviously he's roaming the world with his demons and possessing people. But those people themselves are also evil seed. Yeah. All of that, I think, and this too here is included in that phrase, all causes of evil. So that's just a comprehensive phrase. Now, I like to just keep this passage in mind when I'm talking about that. Yeah.
Okay.
So so just it helps us to look at it when we say we're looking in context, that how Matthew been talking about where evil comes from.
Yeah.
So we know what causes he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. That's all my point is.
Right. Got you. Okay. Yeah. I don't have anything too much to add onto that.
And if the listeners listening in there, or if you get questions about this, right?
Yeah.
Feedback and pushback is really good, because then I can actually go, it was something, it's nothing, whatever, or I can refine what I'm saying and thinking.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that would be helpful on that one. I think what I've noticed as I've dug into these things, this sort of language of sin and evil is often, there's more to it than just as obvious as some people make it to be.
Yeah.
Slammer N says, "Hi, Darren."
G'day.
So yeah, I'll just put it that if you think it's as straightforward as the devil is evil and people are generically good, or people are totally corrupt, maybe Calvinism, the root total depravity, maybe it's not quite as straightforward as that. But by our actions we will be known, and I think there is an element of people are the cause just as much as the devil is. So that there's a bit more nuance. So I've got an article.
Well, yeah, I think what he's saying is that you're evil. Like, let's go back to the text again. So he says, what does he say? You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil?
Yeah.
For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So he's not just saying they do things, but they do bad things because they fundamentally are evil.
There is evil. Yeah. That's
it doesn't mean that all Pharisees were evil. He's talking about these specific ones. All right. And he's saying that out of the well, that is, it's if in deep down inside they were pure, then that's what you'd get coming out.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah. So that's a cause of evil, isn't it? That's what's coming out into the world. In this specific case, it's coming out in the world directed towards Jesus. They're going to kill him, assassinate him, but that's what he's addressing. But you can see how that idea that it's welling up from within them. So that's how I'm seeing the cause. It's the cause of evil. But I don't think they're the ultimate cause of evil in the world. But in Matthew, it seems like that's alongside, say, the devil who sowed the seeds, who are evil anyway. Yeah. And you can do a study, as I said before, you can do a study on that word, just evil as it's, and this seems to be a little bit of a theme that's unpacked by Matthew.
So I think just in that context of him referring to like being called or under the mastery of the Beelzebul, is definitely, he's kind of throwing it back at them, isn't he?
Yeah.
I'm not the one who's actually got to be worried about.
You people are. You people are. You're evil. He's evil. Yeah. So he really is. He really, like, they're trying to trap him by saying, "Well, who are you? What's really your authority?" And he's going, "Well, I can't throw out a man. This authority I haven't defeated already. But you people are evil."
Yeah.
And you're the ones that are doing evil. You're the ones who have evidence, and so you must be evil. So, but you get to Matthew 13, and he's talking about all those causes of evil. So, so he really, I think, must there have this kind of thing in mind, as well as other points in the gospel where not just the demons are running around causing evil, but human characters are too.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we've got last section.
Yeah, there's not much in that. You can read it if you want, but I won't really have anything to say. All
right. Well, just for completeness' sake, we'll read the rest of Matthew 12, and I might actually have a shorter one than usual on this one, but we'll see. So 38. Then some of the experts of the law, along with some Pharisees, answered him, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." But he answered them, "An evil and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was in the belly of the huge fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. The people of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because they repented when Jonah preached to them, and now something greater than Jonah is here. The Queen of the South will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and now something greater than Solomon is here. When an unclean spirit goes out of a person, it passes through waterless places looking for rest, but does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the home I left. When it returns, it finds the house empty, swept, clean, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they go in and live there. So the last state of that person is worse than the first. It will be that way for this evil generation as well."
This evil generation.
It's pretty brutal. It's fairly complete about the generation, isn't it? Well, while Jesus was still speaking to the crowds, his mother and brothers came and stood outside asking to speak to him. Someone told him, "Look, your mother and your brother are standing outside wanting to speak to you." To the one who had said this, Jesus replied, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing toward his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my mother, my brother and sister and mother.
Yeah. Actually, I do have something to say.
There you go. Oh, you might.
Did you? Well, that's the way it is when you're reading.
Yeah,
Here's another nugget.
Yeah.
Yeah, keeping chapter 13 in mind, and where in the first interpreted parable, Jesus actually talks about insiders, outsiders. So that's my terms for saying, look, he speaks to parables of people who don't understand anyway. They're kind of defining them, and he actually also talks about the disciples as being people he gives the explanation to so they can understand. Well, he's defining here who the outsiders are, this evil generation, and he's defining who the good people are, as his brothers and sisters. So he's actually, from here on, he'll go and talk about that, but that's where he's defining who they are. But notice here, there's that connection between the demonic oppression and the evil generation, where you can, again, it's not just the human characters that are evil, but they're affected by the demonic realm who does cause that evil as well. So it's a both end, where he would be saying, yeah, you got evil within you, but of yourself, it comes out. But look at these demons that also come in and they make it worse, and so it goes hand in hand. So when you come to that language later where it says all causes of evil, that's what I'm thinking of.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then you get then you get in Matthew 13:43, I think it is, where it talks about, the good people shining like the sun, which is an allusion to Daniel, which is which then has this idea of eternal life.
Yeah,
okay. So he's defining who those people are right here. So we don't have to wonder when we get to 13.
That's good to connect that so that we remember when we do come back to this, probably in 2021, I imagine, just given availability and things like that. Cool. I don't have much more to add on that bit either, but
neither do I.
It's good to see.
That's all we. Sorry.
It's good to see all those connections and have that discussion. I don't have too much more, but Matthew 13 will give us plenty to chew on.
It'll be more specific with judgment and everything, but today's goal for me was just to pull out those nuggets and just get people to think about them, even if they don't ultimately find some of them or all of them or none of them, I don't know, persuasive. But to me, if you just keep reading Matthew, from beginning to end, and you see these kinds of things coming up and different themes being developed in different ways, that strengthens the overall case if it pans out, even if individual instances don't always pan out.
I think the gold in that passage that's really stood out, just that phrase, and who brings justice to victory, that Christ has already won the victory and we'll wait for the culmination of justice. And that's something that stood out in this that I've not really pondered on that much, but I'll definitely dig into that more. And there's always something out of these.
Well, if it helps, I only realized it yesterday.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah. It's really helpful. So for those who have watched or just dropped in and left, thank you for dropping in. We'll probably end the conversation there for this one. We're not sure when the next session is. Darren and I will talk offline and get another date in at some point. If you want to follow Hell Project, subscribe, share, you can do all that. But if you want to see wider topics discussed from a UK perspective with my mate Dan, who's also a conditionalist, we have a load of different conversations on the Critical Witness. So youtube.com, Critical Witness. And we've got a website, criticalwitness.uk, and it's also on a podcast, which I haven't ever got around to doing with the Hell Project. So
the cats.
No worries.
Cat scratch on the chair.
Get a cat in there. So I'll end my spiel there. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to go off. Any final words, Darren?
Oh, no, that's it. Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Right. God bless. Hope you enjoyed this, and leave a comment.
Thank you, everyone.
See you later.
All right. Goodbye.